Welcome back to episode 3 of the From the Spot podcast. Today I'm joined by Luke, Owen and Lucas, and we're going to talk through this week's biggest sporting stories. And I think the one we've got to start off with is Manchester City have been accused by the Premier League of more than 100 breaches of their financial fair play regulations. It's quite a big accusation, and it's a 4-year long investigation that's taken place that could see them stripped of their titles, points deductions, expulsion from the league. What do we all make of that?
I mean, it's you're right. It's a massive allegation, and I think it's been something they've been reviewing for a very long time. So it's definitely got some weight behind it in terms of the breaches that they've made in terms of their financial regulations. So it's a real eye opener as to say some of the things that are kind of being disclosed. I was looking earlier, and there was a point of content of saying that Mancini, his entire contract at the time he was manager of Man City, they hadn't disclosed his salary at all in their figures, and you've got to think that something like that. I mean, it's almost blatant lying in the face of what other clubs are doing. And I know there's now a lot of talk about kind of, well, if Man City are doing it, what are other clubs getting away with? How deep does this go potentially? But I think it's one of those where a lot of people have kind of been nonchalantly throwing it off and saying, oh, it'll just be a slap on the wrist, they'll get away with it. But I really do think this is an opportunity now to just really look at the Premier League as a whole and see what kind of has been going on and has been going on behind the scenes.
I suppose that's a big difference as well between this ruling and UEFA's one a couple of seasons back, because they were faced with that two season ban from European competition by UEFA, but they appealed it at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. They're not allowed to do it with this one, which, the Premier League's independent commission's ruling is final. So we're expecting that to take a few more years, to be honest. But it could change, the history of the Premier League. I think I saw earlier it'd be Liverpool would have won 3 more leagues. United would have won 3 more leagues. And I mean, for managers like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, that's career defining. Do you know what I mean? He goes from a manager that achieved nothing really to a Premier League winning manager.
Yeah, I mean, you say that.
Where does that kind of?
Is that really gonna? I don't think a fan base is gonna let that sit well. It's Liverpool have their quote unquote COVID season. I don't think that fans around the world are gonna go, oh, Liverpool, all of a sudden we've won 3 and 5. I just don't think they're going to accept it. It's going to say that on the website. It's going to say that in the history books. But the people that are here and the people that know it, they're not going to go, well, yeah, that league doesn't count then. I just don't think that's going to go down well. And of course, they've got to adhere to these rulings and they've got to adhere to these rules. But I mean, there's no smoke. There's no fire without smoke. And they've been accused of this twice now. So I don't think it comes as a shock to anyone really that, they've got this money out of nowhere and, they finished, what was it, 2nd or 3rd in the Deloitte Money League. It's like, yes, they're a massive club and they, go on the pitch, but they don't have the finances and they don't have the following really to get that type of revenue through the door. So, yeah, I just can't see it that if it is punishment through what is rightly, if they've broken the rules, they deserve to be punished. But I think, stripping titles, it's, that's history now. I don't think there's really going to be anyone that looks at that and goes, yeah, that's acceptable. I think it'll be point deductions, fines, maybe even expulsion from the league, but I can't see any sort of stripping of titles and that sort of thing.
I think a big point as to why they're in such deep trouble as well is the fact they just didn't communicate with the league. Because I saw earlier, I think it might have been on Sky Sports, that they stopped communicating after the UEFA whole appeal thing. So that's now 4.5 years that they haven't communicated with the Premier League. Adding to that, Mancini's contract was never discussed. There were, I think, from 2011, 2012 to 2016-17 rings bells. They didn't discuss player salaries with the league. So it's quite an extensive time period that's nothing's been run by the league. It's a strange one, really, isn't it?
It really does sort of feel like they've tried to get 2 fingers up, I think they want to operate in a way that they feel like they can because of who they are, but they aren't in this position without having this sort of kind of questionable finance, and it's one of those where you'd really think if anyone of kind of sane mind would want to be as be as kind of adhering to the rules as much as possible when you've got that much money at play, because if you are trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes, they are going to find out eventually. And that's the thing. I don't think the cheaters never prosper. As the saying goes, like it's not going to be. Yes, it's a quick win. It's a short-term gain, but you need sustainability there. And I think it's a real kind of spotlight on ownership, and it's been something that's been discussed for the last 20 years or so in terms of sports ownership, and we've spoken about it on the podcast before. Like, it is very much a kind of a comment for debate, like of whether or not this sort of money should be involved in football, but it's here, and then it will now have to be regulated, and then we're finding out these sorts of things every day, like new bits of information. And you're right, it does just seem a bit strange how they would just not disclose things to the FA or to the Premier League directly. Like, when if you get them on side and you're doing everything within their eyes, they will. Do you know what I mean? They've been proven in the past that they can turn a favourable eye to different teams. So I don't know why you would almost go against to try and bite the hand that's feeding you. You know?
Yeah, I mean, Chelsea are kind of, as long as they're not, not speaking to the league, I suppose they're not as serious as City are at the moment. But, Chelsea's spending recently kind of raises eyebrows a lot, especially with, the recent signing of Enzo Fernandez, 106 million, British record transfer fee. And his debut, Lucas, you watched it as well, didn't you? He was good. He settled in quite well. But it's a point that was raised on Sky Sports as well. As a holding midfielder, when you're not going to be getting goal contributions every game, how do you judge if someone's worth that sort of amount of money? Because, for attackers, we judge off purely goal contributions at the end of the day. Defenders, clean sheets. But when you're in the middle of the park, it's quite difficult to find, okay, what are we actually judging him on? Because without that, you go out and you throw 105 million out, and it's like, what are we actually getting back? That maybe a 40 million pound midfielder or a 50 million pound midfielder couldn't do.
Well, I think you look at it, and it's the world of stats now is coming into football, and these detailed sort of breakdowns, and they're being used more and more, in Brighton's model and in Liverpool's model of old. It's all about diving deep into the stats and looking at, progressive passes and everything that's deeper than that, ball recoveries, tackles and interceptions per 90. And, most casual fans won't look at those sort of stats. They won't look at those sort of numbers. They'll say, oh, how many goals and assists he's got, For example, today even I saw someone on Twitter talking about how Thiago is a sideways and backwards passer who never does any tackling and never does any defensive work. And I instantly, I'm just sat there like, the guy is in the 97th percentile for progressive passes per 90, and the 88th percentile for tackles and interceptions. It's like, you're just sort of throwing outlandish things out there with these sort of crazy sort of, just trying to get sort of wow factor. But with Enzo Fernandez, a lot of it is, I think, a little bit based on the fact that it's such a small sample size. 4 or 5 months ago, no one had really heard of him. He just moved over to Benfica. Obviously had a great World Cup, but he's played less than 100 professional matches. And if you look at the transfer records, top 10 in England, he's number 1 now, but he's the only player on that list to have played less than 100 matches. I think he's played 70, 71 or something like that. So, it swings and roundabouts with that argument. You can look at him and say he does this, 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 and this on a detailed stage, but you also got to look and go, well, he is only 21 years old. How valuable can he really be? Is 105 million, is it too much? And, I don't want to throw yes or no's out there, but personally, I wouldn't have paid that. But,
I think a lot of it comes into the fact they've bought him off the back of such an impressive World Cup performance. If they'd have waited maybe a season or two, it's weighing it up, really, isn't it? Because obviously football transfer fees are going up every transfer window. It's getting crazy. But buying someone off the back of a World Cup, we've always known that inflates fees so much higher than they should be. So would they have been better off waiting maybe a season or two? Or was now the right time to buy with a 21-year-old whose value is just going to go up and up and up?
I think you've got to look at it from the point of view of, you're probably right. If he goes back to Benfica now for another 6 months, prior to the transfer, if he's coming off the World Cup, he's back at Benfica for another 6 months. They maybe progress another round, maybe 2 in the Champions League, but I don't see it likely. I think as always, you get to the nitty gritty now, where the big teams will face those sorts of teams, and They usually come up short. But you're right. I mean, you could get to next summer. He may have had a bit of a quiet tail off the season, a few assists here, a few goals. Maybe there's an option for an acquisition between 75 to 80 million, and people are thinking that's still a lot of money, but he's still he's only just still 21, maybe 22 at that time. There's still much potential for growth. The difference being, I think, is Chelsea saw it as the opportunity to go and say it's a fairly statement signing. It's in the engine room in an area where quite openly Tuchel had said before that we didn't need reinforcements in there, but the ownership saw different. They'd seen an aging midfield in Kante and Jorginho, and they wanted to change it up. They wanted to make a statement, and I think they were willing to pay a little bit more, certainly over the odds, for a player that let's just say 12 months ago was only worth about 12 million. And I think United and Liverpool both had the opportunity to look at him and weren't really interested, as you say, because the sample size is so small. But I think that it's a big risk. It's a big gamble. I think there is definitely a very good player in there. And he's got all the right qualities and the right attitude, I think, from what I've seen of him in this very short time. But it's that extra 40 million, as I say, that they've probably invested up front now to make sure that they get his signature, and there's no potential that he goes to a Real Madrid or Liverpool or a City in the summer, when we've had a couple of times in the January transfer window. In the summer transfer window before, we were burned a little bit, where Rafinha didn't want to come to Chelsea, went to Barcelona. Jules Koundé went to Barcelona. So I think they were probably a little bit wary of going, how big is the pool of Chelsea if we're opening the field up to other competitors that can hopefully get the cash together when it comes to a summer transfer window and there's more time to plan. And that's why I think they brought the big guns out. They had Bowley was in there and in the actual room, and there was a very close point. I've heard different rumors, different stories, but they were close to coming to a physical confrontation at some point in the meeting room with regards to the transfer. And there was talks of Enzo Fernandez was on his knees praying to Rui Costa, saying he wanted to go now because he didn't know if he'd ever get the chance again. But yeah, it adds to the drama of the kind of the story behind it. And there's a lot of stuff that as you say, we don't know about him. We just don't know. It's so much speculation because we don't have statistical data to back it up over what he's done over the last 5-6 years. It's very much he's on track to do very well, but we just don't know. But yeah, like I think they see it as a need. I still think they're going to look to reinforce in the summer. I still think they're going to be in the conversation for Caicedo. I think Declan Rice will still be looked at. I think Enzo Fernandez as well will look to be moved slightly further forward than maybe he's been used at the moment, because we've got injuries to Zakaria. Kante is starting to come back now. He's not naturally he has natural gifts in that area in terms of tackling and ball retention, and he's very tenacious in terms of his ability in that area of the field. But I think he would like to be slightly let off the leash a little, I think, in terms of for his future with the club. And it's very much a watch this space. And I think that's another thing as well with the 8-year deal that they've given and the long contracts they've given to Madueke and to Mudryk as well. They're looking to try and spread the payment out over a certain amount of time, so the depreciation of the asset is reduced as much as possible. And again, they probably know a lot more about kind of what UEFA and what the FA are talking about behind the scenes before it becomes public knowledge, in terms of what they want to do with the financial side of things. I imagine there's an element of what with Abramovich selling up last year. I know there was a lot of different kind of context around that, but I do wonder sometimes if part of the sale as well was him knowing that they were going to be starting to clamp down on the finances. So I think hopefully now with this new acquisition by Clearlake Capital that they're going to be looking at it as we're going to do things by the book. We have to do things by the book for at least the next 5 to 10 years while they really define what the rules and regulations are for the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It is a good point. And I suppose it's not just Chelsea's incomings this season, it's potential outgoings that haven't gone through, with Ziyech and everything. On that final day, transfer to PSG, which is, I mean, it's a strange one in itself, looking likely, but they're not going through because Chelsea didn't submit the deal sheet in time. It's a strange one, isn't it? We don't normally see that at such a high level of football. It's the administration errors that are costing teams transfers and things like that. But But do you worry now, as a Chelsea fan, having someone that doesn't want to be at the club in the dressing room?
I do think it's a very funny situation, especially with the fact that he comes back into the team and starts against Fulham. It's a very, very odd scenario to be in, because you've got Aubameyang there, who's now been left out of the Champions League squad, which is a very bold call. It's something that I kind of personally back because of the direction they're trying to run the club in. But again, he is a proven goal scorer. He's still our top scorer in that competition, and he's now going to have to sit on the bench for the remainder of the season, unless he gets a late move to. I think the Turkish transfer window is still open, and there's talk of him going to the MLS as well. But unless something like that really happens, he will literally just be sat on the bench for the remainder of the season, and it's a shame because at his best he was one of the best Premier League strikers we've seen, but he just hasn't kept it up consistently. And I think it's a very clear example of someone who has to be in the right environment with the right people around him, taking on board what he wants to do for him to thrive. And you saw with Arteta, the relationship ended sourly. And then I think that's going to be the same way it will go at Chelsea. It will be another write-off for a striker that we really looked at, a high-profile striker, and a long list of high-profile strikers that have been at the club that haven't quite done what they were asked to be able to do. But yeah, I think the Ziyech transfer is really interesting in terms of if PSG were keen on him, you have an entire month to kind of make that known. But it did sort of seem like it all came out of nowhere in the last 48 hours. Even the Jorginho transfer, I think a lot of that was done with the view that Fernandes was going to be like signed, sealed and delivered. But it still seemed a little bit funny in terms of he was out the door quite early on deadline day, but Fernandes was left right up until the deal sheet time limit to be announced and to be confirmed. So it's I think they are being very kind of quietly optimistic. I think there's an element of maybe they didn't ever want to get rid of Ziyech. It was a play to kind of force PSG's hand. It's very, very funny business to go about, though, in terms of repeatedly kind of sending over the wrong documents or not being open to communication. You hear a lot of these sorts of things, and we get an insight slightly into how transfers works with kind of different documentaries that have been up. I'm thinking kind of Sunderland Till I Die. I remember they kind of looked at the who was it? It was the Ireland striker, wasn't it? That they tried to sign on deadline day. Will Grigg, wasn't it? Was it not in the documentary? Yeah. And there was all the talk of, I'll just pay the money, and they paid I can't remember how much it was, but it was well over the odds of kind of what they should have paid for what the output he gave the club. And it was you do sort of see that sometimes it comes down to an impulse of what the owner wants to do. And they said about Todd Bowley, apparently after watching the World Cup final, said to his advisors that get me that player, get me Enzo Fernandez, I want him. And it's one of those where clearly their attention was on that transfer. Maybe they just weren't worried about Ziyech going, which you think is a shame, because especially when you're managing people and you're dealing with people's livelihoods here, if he's not going to get a game time, he showed how good he can be when he played for Morocco at the World Cup. If he's not good enough for the club, or you don't see a reason for him to be there, you should let him go. But at the end of the day, he has got a contract, and I don't think, as much as he has a quite laid back manner about him, I don't think he's going to be someone that will really kick up a fuss. I think he's too nonchalant about that, in terms of, I don't think he's that passionate about being a problem. I think he would just be someone that will just take the money and then wait 6 months and get out there, and then just leave with a bit of taste in his mouth, which is a shame. But I've always kind of felt that Ziyech maybe hasn't always fitted in at Chelsea ever since he first got announced. But yeah, I think it's just a sign of the times. We've now got about 6 or 7 wingers on the books, either on loan at other clubs or coming through from the youth squad. So there's a lot to be done in the summer still. But I think the kind of outlay we've had over last summer and this window just gone has allowed us to kind of really accelerate the rebuild that did need to happen. We've got players that were still hanging around. I mean, we've still got fringe players that are out on loan that have been there since before Maurizio Sarri, since Conte. And that's kind of just can't fly. Like the Bakayoko deal, which seems ridiculous. I don't know why we haven't just got to a point where we can have a conversation with him, terminate the contract, let him go wherever he wants to, let him and his agent sort out his next move. But that's just one example of how kind of badly the decision making has been before this period of time, and hopefully there'll be an improvement in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's something you just touched on there, but the Jorginho to Arsenal transfer. Lucas, what's your thoughts on that? Where does he kind of fit into that midfield? Because obviously you've got Al-Nene's injury. Do you see him as a direct replacement, or more just squad depth, or who's going to sacrifice their place for Jorginho to come in?
I don't think anyone sacrifices their place. I think he's just another player to have. We've been raw in the midfield, and I think as soon as it got announced, everyone was a bit, reactionary. Jorginho, yet again, we're signing another Chelsea retiring player, but I think that's only because we missed out on Caicedo. If there was no news on Caicedo and we bring in Jorginho, as people did a few days later, they sit and they think and they go, right, okay, he's good depth. He can play as 6, as we saw against Everton, and then he can also play as the 8, which we don't have because, Elneny's injured. Smith Rowe seems to be injured again, and we just don't have the depth there. So, yeah, I think it's an all right signing. A few years ago, I probably would have been a bit annoyed with Edu and stuff for not trying harder with Caicedo, but we've seen that even with Mudryk that they do try for the transfer, so I think it's an all right deal.
Yeah, I mean, the midfielders this window have been quite difficult to come across, and the prices that we have seen being floated around are obviously inflated by the likes of Enzo Fernandez and whatnot. But going forward, do you think that Arsenal have maybe got the squad depth they need now to push City to the end for that Premier League title? Obviously, the defeat to Everton on the weekend wasn't ideal, but you were kind of saved by Spurs and Harry Kane's goal against City to kind of keep it level at the top. But yeah, going forward, do you think Arsenal have got what it takes to push for that title?
Yeah, I think we spoke about this on the first episode, I think, and I'm definitely a lot more optimistic now. We've got Trossard in for the winger depth. We've got Kivior, who I don't know much about, from Spezia, who can be competition for Gabriel, who we haven't had, and now we've got Jorginho in midfield. So when you look at the window as a whole, Arsenal has actually done the business that we need to get, the backups that we've been looking for. And all of the players that I've mentioned can easily play in the Europa League. We're not going for these youngsters that might be good enough, might not be. We've got the likes of Jorginho, he can definitely do it in the Europa League, he won the Champions League. But I think moving forward, we can definitely now go for the Europa League and the Premier League, and I don't think it's either or.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, you're getting further and further through the season, and City had the perfect opportunity to close that gap on the weekend, but they couldn't. And Spurs weren't exactly the better team, I wouldn't say so. I think City dominated, but they just couldn't capitalise. It was Haaland's first game without a shot on target, I think I saw somewhere. So
yeah, he had no touches in the box as well. It was very, very interesting setup to have a lone striker and don't have De Bruyne in behind trying to find him against 3 centre-backs for a team that aren't going to be broken down by someone running in behind, especially if you're not going to play the ball to him. So it was a very, very funny setup from Guardiola. But this is the one thing that's always been a bit of a problem about him. Yes, he's had record-breaking seasons with some of the best players who put in some of the best performances over the last 5, 6, 7 years, but he's always had this ability about him to overthink. It's ultimately what lost in the Champions League final, deciding not to play a holding midfielder. And it's always really, really funny. You just think that your direct rival for the title has slipped up against a team with a new manager bounce. It's the perfect time to put your best team out. No Phil Foden in the squad. The whole Cancelo thing leaving as well is very interesting to see what's going on behind the scenes. I would be very surprised if they don't get the Champions League, if Guardiola is kind of sticking around, especially with all what's going on, as we said at the start of the pod, with the financial issues.
Yeah, because he said last year that if the board had lied to him, he'd walk. So that could be an interesting one when the final decision is made as to what's happening with that. But yeah, I mean, leaving De Bruyne out of that squad just seemed completely counterintuitive. I know he's experimenting with his formation at the moment, going for that weird kind of 3-2-5 that we're seeing. This very attacking focused. So leaving De Bruyne out of that, who's, good defensively, excellent in attack, even just playing for set pieces, you lose out on so much by not having him in the squad. His ability to bang in a free kick from 25, 30 yards out is something that very few players can offer. No one else in that City squad, except maybe Gundogan. So leaving De Bruyne out, it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. And you've got to wonder what's actually going on in Pep's head there.
It's really interesting with the transfers as well. I mean, it's particularly, as you say, with that formation change of playing essentially a left back, but as a holding midfielder, why on earth would you get rid of Zinchenko when he is the ready-made player to be put in that position? All he's done is benefit Arsenal, let alone with giving them Jesus, who I think would ultimately probably work better in the system than Haaland is right now. They've got a bit of a problem where they're set up for Haaland to score goals, and yes, he's going to get the golden boot and potentially break the goal-scoring all-time record in the Premier League in a single season. But the thing being, the team doesn't operate as well as it has in the past couple of seasons. They don't look as comfortable. They don't look as assured in their build-up. They just don't seem quite to know what they're doing. And to rely on Rico Lewis now playing all the time when Zinchenko was ready-made and proven and experienced in that position, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I think it's one of those. I think Arteta, as we've said, has done a brilliant job. And I have said in the past on here that I thought City would kind of use that know-how, that experience to really push on at the end of the season. But I just don't see it now. The way they're set up, I don't see them going on a run of 10, 15 games unbeaten. But whereas for Arsenal, yeah, they can slip up against Everton. Of course, that can put nerves on them. They lose in the cup as well. And it's a case of, okay, let's see what they're really made of now. We're coming to the point where we're sort of at the end of what would have been the Christmas fixtures. This is the nitty gritty now. The European football's coming back in a couple of weeks. But I think you're right, Lucas, as you said, the squad is set up to potentially go on both fronts, because they can just make those slight changes here and there, bring in different personnel. They've got rid of the players that really were just sort of soaking up the wages at the point, like in Cedric. They've got Marquinhos has gone out now on loan. Is it to Norwich he's gone?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And it's really good. They're really setting themselves up. They know what they're going to do. And if lo and behold they don't get it this year, I think they'll be back even stronger next season. So it's just really funny. It's a really funny situation for Pep to have gone in the summer. I'm getting rid of Jesus and Zinchenko to essentially to my direct rival now, and then we're going to end up playing a system that doesn't really suit us. At a point when Liverpool was falling away as well. It's really funny.
Something else I find quite strange is Leeds getting rid of Jesse Marsch, because with Dyche having gone to Everton last week or the week before, whenever it was, who can they get in that's better or even on par with Marsch? Because he's brought in all these American talents that he knows from American clubs and all of his contacts. His style of play seems to be kind of getting there. There's a clear vision at the club. He's been backed in the transfer window. And yeah, they're still lingering around 17th, and they're only out of the relegation zone on goal difference. But that's where they were last season when he came in. And he's not had a full year yet. You've kind of got to wonder how long is a club willing to give to start seeing those results. Because, yeah, they're not there yet, but the future's looking promising. You've got that Gnonto on the wing. Excellent talent. Proven his Premier League quality already. You've got, what's that left back's name? The other American one. Was he a left back, right back? Hang on, let's have a look. I can't think what his name is. I know exactly what I mean.
McKennie as well, haven't they?
Yeah.
I mean, Weston McKennie's a good player. Brendan Aronson as well. He's a good player. Yeah, they've got building blocks there, and I think it is a very strange decision, especially with the timing. Just after the window. You'd have thought if they were going to do it, maybe it would have come before the window, give the manager some time to build a squad, build some acquisitions and that sort of thing. But now I think, like you said, who takes that job now? I mean, obviously Bielsa's not going to come back. I very much.
There's talk that he is.
I don't know. I think
it's
that
not
every time
right
a manager
though,
comes
is
back
it?
for a second ride, it
I can't
never
see it.
seems to really go well. Like, I mean, you look at Jose when he went back to Chelsea, like, it just doesn't really gel the same. It's not really the same impact. I think you've got a couple managers out there. I mean, Wayne Rooney maybe,
But he's not an
Postecoglou
improvement.
maybe,
That's the thing.
but yeah, well, that's what I mean. Yeah, it's a really difficult situation. I struggle to see why they've made it at the time they have and who they see in that position now.
I think if they'd gone back maybe 2 weeks and made the decision to sack him, it would make perfect sense. You know, Dyche is still available. Get Dyche because Leeds is a more attractive prospect, at least to me, than going and taking the Everton job. You know, the squad they've got is better. The facilities they've got are better. But now that Dyche is out of the picture, there's no one really that's going to be willing to take on the Leeds job. Not that I can think of anyway.
Steven Gerrard, get him in. Frank
No,
Lampard,
that's
one of
the only
them.
option,
They'll take
really.
it.
Yeah, I mean, if they weren't down, they'd be down already if those two came in. I think you're right. I mean, Dyche makes so much sense, and it's easy to laud him, especially having beaten the current top team in the Premier League this weekend. But it was really weird having kind of that nostalgia of seeing Dwight McNeil whip it into James Tarkowski to head it in from a corner. And I've seen this in claret and blue before.
Beforehand.
Yeah. I'm getting deja vu here. I bet that training session was quite straightforward for him to plan. But you look like, this thing with Leeds, it's really weird because I hadn't even realised they hadn't won since November. I think whenever I've seen them play, whenever they've been on Sunday night football, whatever it be,
they've done all right.
Soccer Sunday. I've thought that they played well. They just haven't got the results. And you're right. I just don't know who now comes in, especially when a lot of managers. I mean, it's Carlos Couberán they've been looking at, the West Brom manager. Apparently, he's one of the front runners for the job because he was Bielsa's backroom staff before. He knows the club. But why would you risk moving to a club now when you've got 4.5, 5 months to go? You could just go in the summer when they've either been relegated or stayed up and build. Why would you leave a good job you've got at the moment with West Brom, where they're on the up potentially? You're starting to imprint your style there. The expectations aren't as high because the jeopardy of going down or staying up is not really there. It's just a case of kind of just consistently improving. I just don't know. You can't go and get Sam Allardyce. I
was going to say there's one man for the job. It's Sam Allardyce. He will take that happily.
We'll be batting that around till he's in his bloody 80s. I think that's an option. But I just don't. I wouldn't have seen Leeds kind of being pulled in as much as into this relegation battle as much as they kind of have been now. And I think their future's really up in the air, thinking about who they're going to bring in now. But I also look at the situation with Southampton. There's talk of them getting rid of Nathan Jones now as well. And how long has he been there? About 6 weeks or something?
Yeah, but Nathan Jones, his post-match interview the other day was questionable. He seemed to completely deflect the blame away from himself onto the backroom staff, the players, everyone at the club except him. And at the end of the day, that's not how it works. You know what I mean? As the manager, you've got to take responsibility for the performances on the pitch. The players might not want to play for you, but that's not anyone else's problem but yours.
I've just thought then, why don't Leeds go and get Ralph Hasenhüttl in?
See, that's a good shout. I rate Hasenhüttl.
Yeah, I think he can give them a good run of results for 10 games that give them enough points to keep themselves at least alive until May.
I just had a look through Leeds Premier League results this season, and their biggest defeat is a 5-2 loss against Brentford in September. Since then, they drew 0-0 with Villa, lost 2-1 to Palace, lost 1-0 to Arsenal. So, okay, fair enough. Lost 2-0 to Leicester, 3-2 to Fulham, beat Liverpool 2-1, which I know is not difficult at the moment, but, you still look at it and go, okay, fair enough. They beat Bournemouth 4-3, and that was their last win on the 5th of November. They lost 4-3 to Spurs, so quite close. 3-1 to City, you can't go mad at that. 0-0 with Newcastle, 2-2 with West Ham, lost 2-1 to Villa. But under Emery, they're doing all right, so you can't really go mad at that either.
Apart from Leicester turning them over this weekend, we'll get onto that.
Yeah, we will. 0-0 with Brentford, and then his final game in charge, a 1-0 loss to Forest. None of those games stand out as games that they've been absolutely hammered, because they haven't. They've played well and got unlucky. But with Gnonto coming in and doing well, you think, okay, they are going to start scoring more, and he could be the difference. I think getting rid of Marsh now is way too early. If they were still in 17th at the end of the season, look in the summer. But getting rid of him now, after the window's shut, he can't bring any more players in. The new manager's stuck with what Marsh wanted. It just doesn't make sense.
They've massively missed out, because I think Rodrigo's hot run of form at the start of the season really kind of paved over the cracks of not having Bamford firing on all cylinders. He's been injured. He's been in and out of the team. He's not quite back to what he was at before and under Bielsa. And that's as cliched as it is, having a solid centre forward that can bang you in your 10 to 15 goals, someone who takes your penalties regularly, having that consistency there, it makes a difference. Look, I mean, Fulham aren't in a relegation battle, but their team is not the same if Alexander Mitrovic isn't there. Brentford are flying, but their team is not the same if Ivan Toney isn't there. And I'm not putting a slant on Thomas Frank or Marco Silva in terms of their managerial capabilities. I'm just looking at the kind of brass tacks of saying that the centre forward for those sorts of clubs is very key. And you got to hold them down to a long-term contract, make them as happy as you can, and then they'll score you the goals. And it's the talk with Sean Dyche as well. Like, if Calvert-Lewin can come back to scoring how he was before, they'll have no trouble. I don't think they will have any trouble now. I think they're going to be set up. They're going to be very hard to beat. They're going to do the simple things well, and they're just going to run their socks off. And the bottom 5 teams in the Premier League, if you can do that, you have got a very good chance of staying up. If you want to push on, that's when you've got to start imprinting a style. You've got to start imprinting any sort of effort. It's the same. It's the same with West Ham. I think it's the adage of they're too good to go down. I think they will show their class now. I think they played very well against Newcastle, and it was. There's a lot there that I think they've just had such a heavy campaign the last kind of couple seasons with the Europa League run, and there's just a lot of probably mental pressure on a lot of these players. Just as soon as a couple results start to go a bit hairy, they think, oh, okay, we normally would win these sorts of games. We're now sort of reverting back to what would be West Ham type of having to really fight for every point. And it's a different mentality when you go from like losing someone like Craig Dawson, who comes in and makes an immediate impact for Wolves, to then having to have players like Lucas Paqueta, who is very much a player that, yes, he's got a lot of ability, but he needs to be able to be there for the dogfight to really get his boots dirty and really
that's what David Moyes is sort of trying to do now, isn't he? There's
he's
almost
going back
this idea that he's trying to shift to a sort of more possession style football, bringing in like, Scamacca, Paqueta, those sort of players. But at the end of the day, West Ham's identity the last few seasons has been, taller, bigger, stronger, and got bigger fight in them than everyone else. And it seemed to have worked the last few seasons at least. So I get there's a certain level of evolution needed to take yourself to that next stage. And to be these top teams, you have to have, 55, 60% possession. But, if something works, I don't, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, Luke, it will be the fact that West Ham come back and they will prove their class, and they are far too big to be going down, and they've got a lot of talented players there. And I think they'll be fine. I think it's the Southamptons, Evertons, Bournemouths, and as you say, Leeds. I think those are the clubs that are really going to be looking, over their shoulder after every weekend, checking the table, sort of thing.
With another interesting point that Luke hinted at quite briefly then was Leicester. I think our transfer window's gone completely under the radar. We've sorted out the 3 positions that Brendan wanted at the start, which was a left back, a centre back, and a right winger. We've shipped out Mark Albrighton, which I'm not happy about. A very versatile player. And he might not be the most young to watch, but he always puts Leicester.
Yeah,
and it's another one of that title-winning season gone.
Yeah,
but we've replaced him with Tete, who scored on his debut, looked really impressive. Club's first Brazilian. That just boosts the club abroad as well.
Instantly up to speed in the Premier League as well, which is not an easy thing to do.
No,
not a great niche side though. Really bad niche.
But his movement for the goal is something that you wouldn't necessarily associate with player at a club like Leicester. Like it's really intelligent football, and it could be a really good acquisition.
Also, that link up on the right hand side with Ricardo, both Portuguese speaking, there's that connection straight away. and I think that's going to help him settle in massively. We've got Harry Souttar in at centre back, unlucky with the own goal, but at the same
nothing you can
time,
do about that.
He's been having
Danny
a chat.
Ward
He's
should
been
have been
having a
saving
chat with his curly-haired friend.
But then, like, Victor Christiansen at left back, I didn't watch the game. Obviously, 3:00 kickoff on a Saturday, but he was impressive from everything I've seen. He was solid and exactly what we need at left back. Because let's face it, Luke Thomas just isn't good enough. So yeah, it's a perfect transfer window. Yeah, we've not signed any big names, but we've got what we needed on the cheap, and it's doing the job. Villa aren't an easy team to beat under Emery. We beat them convincingly. I think that's what a lot of teams need to look at, is not necessarily going for those big name signings like Enzo Fernandez. And I get Chelsea are pushing for a different part of the table to what Leicester are at the moment, but big name signings aren't always what you need. Do you know what I mean? You can go out and get someone on the cheap, like Victor Christiansen or Harry Souttar, or Tet is only on a 6-month loan, but I think we're looking at signing them permanently. It's just because of the whole Shakhtar Donetsk sort of thing, because of that situation over there at the moment. I think it's those sort of cheap players that are kind of not ready-made stars. That's what clubs need to start looking at, because then you're keeping fine because of FFP, and there's so much potential to make profit off them in the future.
No, I think it's very funny, and football is such a fickle sport of everyone talking about Brendan Rodgers week in, week out. Is he good enough? Is the club going in the right direction? The attention has been taken away from Leicester a little bit for the last month or so. And as you say, you've quietly gone about your business. You've acquired 3 positions that you were crying out for in reinforcement. And who knows? I mean, it could be a push upwards now that you might be getting to a point where you're comfortably top 10. There's no real worries. It's just a season of saying, right, okay, there's a bit of a hiccup to start with. In the summer, we kind of deal with what's going on with Vardy. We look at what's going to happen with Maddison, and you deal with that then. But I really think the kind of talk around Brendan Rodgers being, is he good enough for Leicester? Is he the next manager to go? It's not even being spoken about now. It's not even a point on the news. So
yeah,
I
I'll admit, I was in the Brendan out sort of brigade. I didn't think he was good enough at certain points of the season. At the start, he was awful. We had that good run of form for maybe 5 or 6 games, looking good. Okay, we'll keep him in. And then since then it dropped off. The thing is with him, he's so inconsistent. Do you know what I mean? I've seen people that have gone from Brendan out at the start of the season, back to Brendan in, back to Brendan out. And now with that game on the weekend, they're back to Brendan in again. It's because our standards have been so up and down over recent seasons, it's hard to know what we should actually expect. Obviously, no one's expecting that Premier League winning season to be replicated anytime soon. But are we a mid-table side, as in like 11th, 12th? Should we be pushing for Europe like we have done the last few seasons? No one really knows. So it's hard to actually tell what fans are basing Brendan Rodgers off.
I think there's no shame in having not what would be an off season. I think, as you say, you're definitely a team that's pushing towards the top end of the league as opposed to the bottom. So it is strange to see, having seen you be down so low at points this season. But you've got to look at it and say, if you do finish, say 9th or 10th, it's not a great season. But
considering the start,
think where you were 8-9 years ago. To even be dreaming of being able to compete in the top 10 in the Premier League is, and that's the thing. I know I'm very privileged to the club I support, of where we are and the money we can spend. And as you say, like, it's not always about that. Sometimes it's the smart transfers that keep you kind of afloat, keep you moving, keep you progressing. But we very publicly had some very awful seasons at points, and we're going through one now. But it's usually with those periods of time whether your next kind of phase of evolution comes into it. I would be very surprised if we're down this low again next season. Well, particularly if Potter would still be there, if that was the way it was, if that's how things were going. Just because of the view of you can have that time to come back, you can reset, you can rethink things. Rodgers may go in the summer. He may feel his time is done at the club, and they may feel that their time is done there. But I think for what he's achieved with your team, just keeping him on to the end of the year, you will be fine. You will be fine. He's a good enough manager for that. And I think then you can look. Then you can see maybe there's a potential to tempt Simeone to come to Leicester. I would be very surprised, and that would be very wishful thinking. But there's options. I mean, there's loads of managers out there that a club with the potential of Leicester. When you think the amount of money that you could unlock by selling Maddison on, I know you don't want to really let him go, but that really gives you a lot of opportunity if you can get 60, 70 million for him to go to Newcastle or something.
I mean, very quickly before we wrap it up as well, have we got a start sub sell this week?
Oh,
we do. We do. And I've been trying to figure out, a good formula for it, one that you don't want to leave anyone out really. And I think the best team to look at is 3 current players on the same team, very big profile names. We're going to go Messi, Mbappe, and Neymar.
Oh,
I'm starting. We've got to start Messi. I don't care what anyone says. Putting him on the bench is criminal. Messi starts. Mbappe on the bench is the definition of a perfect sub. You know what I mean? He's lightning fast. He's got a good finish on him. He can play anywhere across that front 3, really. And Neymar, he's a player I've never really taken to be honest. He's good, I'll admit that, but I don't know. He's just not. He is better than Mbappe, I will admit that. But I think now he's kind of off his peak. Do you know what I mean? You could say the same for Messi, but Messi's Messi. And if you don't put him in the starting lineup, there's something wrong with you.
No, I agree. I think, as you can see on my wall behind me, I've got a Messi shirt. I have put the GOAT Darwin Nunez next to him this week, but I did have Neymar last time around. So yeah, Messi definitely starts for me. I think that's obviously a no-brainer. I think if you're going strictly off of career, it's obviously Messi. But look at it now, I could see arguments for otherwise with his age. But yeah, I'm starting Messi. Then I'm actually going to bench Neymar just because I've always loved Neymar. I've always thought he's an unbelievable talent. Yes, maybe he hasn't reached the potential. Maybe he hasn't gotten to where he needs to be. But personally, Mbappe is getting sold for me just because he's going to get me about 200 million quid, which I'm going to take, especially as a Liverpool fan. I'll take 20 quid at this point. And, with Mbappe as well, you always get these stories about he's bad behind the scenes and he's a little bit of a diva and he's this and that and this and that. And it's something I wouldn't really want to be dealing with. So, yeah, I'm going to go Messi starts, Neymar bench, and Mbappe.
It's an interesting point that you touched on. I think Neymar not reaching his potential was purely down to him leaving Barcelona when he did. I think he left Barcelona way too early.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I have to wholeheartedly agree with Owen. I can't, Messi has to start, as we say. There's no real discussion point there. He's been a phenomenal player. He's one of the best we'll ever see to play the game. Some of the things he's done will never be beaten. Some of the goal scoring feats he's achieved, I don't think will be beaten probably in our lifetime. But I say that someone will come along in 10 years and absolutely obliterate his record. But we'll watch this space. Yeah, Darwin Nunez is going to come in. And he's going to get what, 90 in a calendar year or something, I heard.
Yeah, I back it.
But no, Messi to start. And then I would sub Neymar on within the first 60 seconds of the game just to watch them both play together and have as much fun as they can on the pitch. There is some of the best football you can watch is that when that Barcelona side with Neymar, Messi, and Suarez were all on fire. They're all interchanging. They're all just it's a breathtaking to watch. And I just think you're right. Neymar, yes, is there a point of his he really reached his potential? But what would his potential be if we didn't have Messi and Ronaldo to play just before him? He has been world class. He has been one of the best players in the last 15 years of football. Everyone was after him from what he was playing at Santos, and I think he has achieved quite a lot. I do agree with you. There's still question marks. If he hadn't gone to PSG, would he have done as much as he has? Would he have done more? Would he exceeded it? Would he have gone on to achieve more with Brazil as well? We don't know, but I do think he's still been hands down. If he's not in your starting 11 for some of the best players in the last 20 years, he has to be in your squad. I think you can't ignore him. He's got to be in your 18. And then for Mbappe, it's the same reason as Owen. I mean, if you sold him, you're going to be able to buy yourself another 4 starting 11s. So the amount of money you'd make off of him, yes, he's great, and yes, he could exceed levels of potentially both of them in terms of he may win more trophies than both of them. But do I want from a pure footballing basis right now to watch him play over Neymar or Messi. No, I want Neymar and Messi to be playing together, interchanging, and that's the joy you kind of get from PSG. As much as, yes, they're playing in not the most competitive league, you do get to see the three of them just do some audacious things on a football field sometimes, and it's wonderful. And we're not going to be able to get it for forever. Messi's not going to be playing at the level he is for the next 3-4 years. Neymar is also going to be looking to probably go back to Brazil, retire in the sun, and then Mbappe will go off and do what he's destined to do, probably at Real Madrid. But we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think it's really funny how Messi has gone to PSG, and it was a talk of, oh, he's on his way out because Ronaldo's still in the Prem, he's banging the goals, and now Ronaldo can't score for a Saudi team, and he's been already the coach is talking about he doesn't want to keep him there, and it just shows you that how much quality there is in that little Argentinian's boots.
Yeah, Lucas, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Messi has to start, but I don't know for Mbappe and Neymar. I mean, you sub Mbappe and then bring him on quite early. His value increases, but then does it? I mean, I don't know. I'd probably sell Neymar, and
It's a tough one.
Bench Neymar, and then as everyone else has said, because I don't know.
Go with your gut, Lucas. There are no wrong answers here. I'm just looking at it from a point of view that when he was probably banging in goals for Santos, you were probably starting junior school. So that's what I kind of look at it from that point of view. So I get that maybe you didn't see the meteoric rise of the Brazil's new golden boy.
Probably sell Neymar. I know I don't really have the nostalgia that you guys all have of seeing him score, so I'm looking at it from pretty much.
Yeah, me and Owen, the old funny days over here.
It is.
Yeah,
It's quite interesting how what you grew up watching shapes your thoughts of them, even 10 years down the line.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at it from more of a current point of view, which I don't know if it's a bad thing or not, but yeah, probably Mbappe bench.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting one. I think as long as you've got Messi starting, I don't think there's a wrong answer.
Yeah. You're not going to upset
either of those two. Have got plenty of talent and could quite easily start on the bench.
Yeah. I think, I suppose you're right. Like it is that element of kind of what you've watched as you grew up. And I will always remember Neymar with that silly like nose tape he had on, and his ridiculous haircuts, and him standing there collecting like the I can't remember what trophy it was, but it was him, Xavi, and Messi when Messi had the golden boot for top scorer in Europe, and I think it might have been the Club World Cup they were all playing in or something, and he'd won like young player of the tournament, and then Messi was player of that Club World Cup, and I feel like that you just appreciate players in different ways. It's like you ask certain people, certain generation, their favorite player isn't Messi, it's Ronaldinho. It's because he was there to help start Messi's career, and he is a breath of fresh air when he walks onto a football pitch. And there aren't many players that are like that anymore because of systems, because of stats, and because of I don't know, like all the different ways that football is now played, and the way that you can utilize a team and a starting 11 and this function over form, and it's there's a lot of kind of black and white now with football, where you can write someone off within a game, whereas someone like Ronaldinho is in the same way of someone like Neymar. Just let them play, and they will absolutely astound you at different points, and that's the beauty of football.
Absolutely. I think we'll wrap it up there. We'll be back next week on Tuesday for episode 4, where we'll talk through the biggest sporting stories of the weekend. There's some big games coming up. Manchester City play Aston Villa on Sunday, which could shape their run for the title, and Arsenal face Brentford on a Saturday afternoon.